All council members or steering committee members present. And the recording just started.
Okay, well, thank you, Melissa. Good morning. It's February 1st, 2001, and this is the first meeting of the steering committee for the Vermont Climate Council. We have the newly nominated and selected members of the steering committee with us today. We have Secretary of Natural Resources, Julie Moore, myself, Suzanne Young, Lauren Oates, Liz Miller, and Chris Campany and Jared Duvall. So welcome and thank you for stepping up to be a part of this really important committee to help steer ourselves as a council and the subcommittees through the work ahead, which is going to be pretty heavy lift. So the more we can support the subcommittees and stay focused on the prize here, the better. David Plum, again, welcome and thank you for joining us again and agreeing to facilitate the meeting. And good morning, Jane. You're a week out from your official start, I know. Yes. Thank you for taking the time and doing two jobs at one time. Beyond that, have I missed any council meetings who might be on the call or anyone from your group, David?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right, well, great. Well, David, did you want to get a start and maybe put the agenda up? We could review it and
I'd be happy to do that.
Seen it, and if they want to make suggestions.
Yep, excellent. Thank you, Secretary Young. Let me just throw that agenda up. It's like, as I mentioned, it's part of the meeting invite, and it's also part of, I can never know on Teams if I'm sharing the right document. What is, you all see the agenda?
Yes.
We've got it.
Great. Okay.
This is Chris. Just I'm in my state email box right now. I'm not seeing it. So if you could just make sure I'm on that distribution. I'm not worried about it. I can see the agenda here, just to make sure that I'm on your distribution for that.
I will double check that, Chris.
Okay. Great. So we wanted to do three things today. One is to look again at that PowerPoint that I shared last week around the sort of what we're calling a draft charter, or you could call it a process roadmap. And there's very minor modifications based on our conversation all together as a council last week. We're then going to spend the biggest part of our agenda looking at the subcommittee assignments. Secretary Moore is going to walk us through the results of the survey, and she got incredible response. Basically, everybody responded, which is wonderful. And we'll talk about that and then how to fill the gaps, the kind of criteria we'll be looking for in filling the gaps with non-council members. Then we'll make sure we reserve time at the end to figure out how to manage the February 8th meeting. If there's any public comment at the end of this, I think we have to do a quick public comment if folks are here. And then we're trying to do this in an hour. So that's what we're doing today. Any quick questions on that before we get going? Okay, great. So let's go ahead and dive in. It's going to be challenging for us to do this in an hour. What I will do is I will try to share my screen with that same slide deck you saw last week. It's also in, it should be in that email from Secretary Moore. Let me just pull that up. You guys, I'll do it on my screen as well, so we have it. And we kind of go back and forth on the terminology of process roadmap or charter. We'll just have to settle on a word there. I can make this bigger, hopefully. When I do this, sometimes I lose it, so let me know if it drops away. Okay, what I'm going to do is not walk through every single detail of this, but what I want to do is walk through what has changed. And so, for instance, on this slide we're looking at right now, around the steering committee, which is all of you. And by the way, I congratulate the velocity of work of you guys right now. You've got a 6-person steering committee up and roaring in less than a week, and so that's a pretty impressive thing. The roles have stayed the same. All that's changed is it's specifically saying the 4 members from the appointed members, and we have your names there. And we put in this sentence at the bottom, which came out of the meeting last Monday, which is you all as a steering committee act in the service of the council, organizing its work, but not trying to control it per se. Okay, so it's more of a spirit idea. All right, that's what's changed on this slide. Otherwise, it's identical as what we looked at last time. Moving along, if I can. This has not changed at all, except for that little box at the bottom. And I think this, gets to Chris's comment at the top of the call too, of like how we handle email and things like that. We do need to, particularly for the subcommittees, get some guidance and quick joint learning about how we're going to manage this work and not run afoul of public meeting laws, open meeting laws, and yet be able to do the work well and efficiently. Okay, so that's a piece of work that needs to happen, is about that guidance. That was added into the slide. Otherwise, this is identical of what was seen a week ago. Moving forward, this is not changed. This is exactly the way it was a week ago. And we are doing this right now as we speak in terms of the selection process. In the method for decision making, this has, the only changes that have happened are, there's a bullet at the bottom. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor while I'm doing this, but on the left-hand side about striving for consensus, the final bullet, there was mention in our meeting that we really want to educate ourselves what this means, right? So that you are effective participants in this kind of model. And that means knowing when to push hard for inclusion of things, knowing when, how you want to serve your interests inside this model. On the right-hand side of this slide, the only change has been in this part about disagreements over the substance of the climate action plan. I added a second bullet there about having a high bar for adding multiple viewpoints into the final plan, as this was mentioned a week ago, that when we do add disagreements, different viewpoints in there, we can't just litter the whole document with it. It needs to have a certain relevance of like a very important piece. So that I added that in. Otherwise, this concept of how to make decisions has not changed from how we saw it a week ago and how we discussed it a week ago. Okay, I'm just moving kind of quickly here. In the stakeholder and public engagement, I've added a few bullets at the bottom here. One is about the public engagement portal for asynchronous engagement. That's the second to last big bullet on the right-hand side. And then 2 small bullets at the far bottom right there. The comments around if there's any way of convincing the state to get off Teams and move to Zoom, particularly for the bigger meetings, that would be much, much better. And we should make as a sort of habit and practice, if we have an open chat function throughout a meeting, that we ask non-members to use that at the end during the public comment period. Okay, so that's from a process roadmap kind of standpoint, what's changed. And what was remarkable going through my notes was that very little changed, and that was great. And I hope I've captured them all here. This did not change, and this is something that's particularly important for, I know, as Jane comes on board officially next week, is really helping to understand Jane's role and having that clear for everybody, because Jane really will be the key force keeping this ship moving forward and keeping it afloat, right? So perhaps many of the emails you're getting now from Secretary Moore, you're going to be getting from Jane, and this kind of support that keeps this steering committee up and running and functioning with agendas and this and that is going to be Jane, right? and whatever facilitation support you have. Jane is a critical point person for all the subcontractors and contractors that are going to be on this project. But I just think it'll be important as we go forward that everyone understands where that role comes in. And I don't know whether Jane or Secretary Moore, you want to say a word about that right now, particularly as it relates to this steering committee and the role for Jane in keeping this space going smoothly.
I'm happy to have Jane weigh in. I think you did a nice job sort of covering the wave tops, David. And frankly, this is a new position in addition to all of the other moving pieces, and we're going to have to sort of figure out how to best use Jane's time, recognizing it's a finite resource. But I think you've covered sort of the keys to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I echo everything that Secretary Moore and David have said, and I look forward to, I have been thinking about, at least with the steering committee, like my role is like somewhat of an adjunct member. I do plan on participating in all of these meetings, and supporting this group as much as I can. So I think the subcommittees are where I'm sort of like look to others, and we'll look to the subcommittees to think about how I accurately support their work in what feels like a reasonable amount of effort, because I think that's going to be a big bulk of the work, and trying to figure out how I tap into that will be an ongoing process. So thanks.
That's great. So this is a good moment to pause. I have 5 more slides here that I'm hesitant to go through in detail, but what they are is a description of the 5 subcommittees. But before we go there, I just want to make a pause for our steering committee members to say, anything we've seen so far you feel a need to comment on or adjust, because this is something you'll be taking up next week in the full council meeting. So anything, the folks that you've seen so far in the process roadmap or the charter that you'd want to comment on? All good?
I raised my hand, but maybe we should just jump
sorry,
in.
Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
No, this is a smaller group, but maybe raising hand isn't as necessary. I guess I'll just flag as a potential point of concern that I have, especially if we err towards the larger subcommittee size of 12. I see that you say recommending a majority of council members on each. That might be incredibly challenging to meet unless we have members who are willing to serve on multiple subcommittees. So just if that's something that we really want to aim for, I think we'll need to have our subcommittees tightened closer to the bottom end of that scale, around 8 or 9. And then on that same vein, the question about the science and technology subcommittee, if that's also an 8 to 12 member structure, or if that's a smaller cohort of people that are advising maybe across the board.
Those are really good bridging questions in the next conversation, looking at how those subcommittees are populated by council members. And so let's really think about that as we go forward, and we may change that expectation, either in terms of that majority expectation or whether it's a size expectation when we look at it. So let's keep both of those points about the size of the technical and science and data subcommittee, and then this idea of really, it's like, are we really going for a majority of council members? And if that's the case, like, what do our numbers have to be to make that reasonable? Yeah, Jared?
I think this aligns, and maybe it's just kind of underlining the agreement we've already come to, but as I looked at the draft spreadsheet that Secretary Moore helpfully put together on the subcommittee assignments, it looked like there was only kind of one council member, or each council member was only serving on one committee. And I wouldn't want to preclude the opportunity of council members who have the kind of time, expertise, availability from serving on multiple committees. So as long as we're not baking in a structure that limits council members to just one committee, I'm good to move forward, but I just wanted to flag that. Okay.
There is not in the bullet points in this presentation, there's nothing that is precluding council members from serving on more than one committee. So yeah, that's not precluded. And Secretary Moore can maybe say a little bit more about how people have responded to the survey.
Yeah, they gave rank order preference. I think most people's assumption was that they would serve on only one committee, and it may be something we just need to confirm with the council, but I agree. I don't think there's anything that precludes it other than hours in the day.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's Liz. I had one potential suggestion. Potential. I definitely am just throwing this out there. Haven't landed firmly on whether it's a good idea, but many of the council members represent specific sectors, under the statute and by their appointment. And some are in organizations where even if the appointed member could not, just from a time and expertise point of view, serve on more than one committee, somebody else really good in their organization could. And just as an example, like Sue Minter offered to be on the Just Transitions Committee, and I think even offered to be co-chair. But like Paul Zabriskie and her organization would be fantastic on another subcommittee related to weatherization. And, I have two utility folks, not from GMP, but other organizations who offered to serve on subcommittees. And so it's not quite like a member of the public situation, right? I mean, it would actually be potentially coordinated and similar to what the appointed members' viewpoint and representation would be. And it might allow us to both draw on other expertise as well as spread some of the work. And it might even allow us to consider other leadership voices, which is another thing I think we're going to face as we look at the co-chair positions. So anyway, I throw it out there as a possibility.
Thanks.
Essentially associate members or whatever you want to call them, just with regard to subcommittees. It wouldn't change who the voting member is or anything like that, obviously.
I guess I wonder if sorry, this is Jane, wonder if we're going to talk a little bit about that as we talk about subcommittee composition. But I know there has been a question around what House and Senate committees have been appointed to represent and where they have asked to serve on subcommittees. And Lauren, you're a good example, right? Like you have interest, your organization you represent has interest in agriculture and ecosystems, but you were appointed to represent resiliency. So there's, that's a question. I think that's a really good point to consider what folks were appointed to represent, but where their interest lies and whether or not they serve on both or other representatives from the organizations they work for come on as serving on subcommittees.
So
yeah, if that's an open question about me, I flagged both. I'd be willing to sit on either and feel that my subject matter expertise and or organization would serve both well. The piece that stands out to me is that resilience and climate adaptation is found under both the Rural Resilience Subcommittee and also Ag and Ecosystems. And because I'm there to represent resilience to natural hazards, especially, I think of that largely as an ecosystem function, but I really would be happy to be in either of those groups wherever I'm best, and or to sit, if not formally on both, then attend meetings of the other.
So I think, given the time as well, I think we should pivot into actually looking at the subcommittees. I'm not going to walk through. You have this, the remaining 5 slides of this deck are a summary of the subcommittees and what they're supposed to be doing, an initial summary that, Secretary Moore and some of the rest of us have helped put together. So you have that in your inboxes. And if we need to refer to it today as we're talking about expertise, let's do that. We can pull it up quickly. But I think in the spirit of time and just we're sort of transitioning that way naturally anyway, I'd love to get right into it. And so the way to dive into this, I think, would be for Secretary Moore, if you want to talk through or say anything about that, the way the survey came in and that document you circulated around as a starting place of where where Climate Council folks wanted to lend their time.
Sure, I will share my screen just so we're all looking at the same thing. But as you indicated, David, the response was pretty fantastic. In fact, all but one council member either through the survey or through a follow-up email to me indicated what committee they were interested in, and the sort of array that I've shown in this table reflects everyone getting either their first or second choice. Most people ranked all 5, which was great, and maybe the survey forced you to do that. I don't know, but this does reflect everyone getting either their first or second choice. You'll notice that there are 2 committees that are a little bit more heavily weighted towards subcommittee membership than the others, and that was the one piece where I wasn't able to quite work that out. I had in laying these out thought it made sense to try to target 4 to 5 and council members assigned to each committee. With Rural Resilience has 6 and Just Transitions has 3 at this point. So flag that for folks' awareness and consideration. And I also, as I say, just made a guess as to where Adam Knudsen might be most interested and his skills might best align. But didn't have the benefit of his personal input at this point. So I guess would welcome thoughts and feedback.
Julie, this is Chris. Since Catherine Dimitrick is also on resilience and adaptation, maybe it makes sense. It looks like Just Transitions is our most lightly populated. I'm certainly willing to go to move to Just Transitions if that helps with the distribution of membership.
It would a little, Chris, and frankly, I think, you know, with you and Catherine sort of broadly representing municipal interests, having you spread out would also be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that even as we speak.
Okay.
Right.
Do we, Julie, have the ability, just thinking about Just Transitions and the co-chair position, can we have a co-chair who's BIPOC? And I know the seat that's open sitting there on the chart is a state seat, and I don't recall whether I don't think Susanna's on the council, and I don't know if there's another BIPOC member of the state team. But if not, it feels potentially important to me. I'm really glad to see that we have some BIPOC representation elsewhere, because I think that's also important. But
yeah, no, I agree. And I know, David, you'd mentioned at the last council meeting, even this idea of potentially considering a third co-chair if necessary in certain instances, and that may be one. My understanding, and would let Secretary Young correct me if I'm wrong, but from my initial conversation with Susanna, I don't know that she felt she had the time.
right.
She was willing to be a resource to the Just Transitions Committee, but I don't think she had the time. She didn't feel like she had the time to commit to being the co-chair of it. Okay.
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, she is stretched so thin.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of points to the whole problem, right?
Across the entire state,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully help is on the way. We're hoping to get her a couple of positions, but that wouldn't be until the summer. And again, I think the executive members do need to talk about, you know, who can best represent them as co-chairs on each of these committees, and we should have that together in the next day.
What I'll offer a suggestion. I don't know if this is doable or not, but I've been active in the VCRD. Community service providers, their bi-weekly meetings, and Jason Broughton, state librarian, has been very active in that group. Importantly, he also is our key point on census. He just has a good sense of the data and distribution of folk throughout the state. So I'm wondering if he would if he'd be a great resource, not only because he's a BIPOC person, but just where he literally sits in the state, if he wouldn't be a good member of that committee of Just Transitions.
Really great idea.
I appreciate that, Chris. He also works within the Agency of Administration like Susanna. So I had thought of him as well, and again, worry about how stretched he is, but we could certainly, and how much time this would add. But with the census over and him doing such a fabulous job, maybe he's got a little more time. So let me have a conversation with him and at least you know, maybe garner some other ideas. But I appreciate you recognizing his work.
So in terms of next steps on this, it feels like the administration has a next step in doing what Secretary Young said and figuring out really who would be the best co-chair from the administration side. Then what our job is to do is to send out a survey to the full council with some criteria and ideas about how to fill in these other slots with non-council members. And to do that, we need to think about, more broadly speaking, what it is that's missing here in terms of expertise and balance. And then circle back on Lauren and Jared's points about size and you know, whether this is going to be majority or not. It's pretty hard to imagine at this point majority counselors on these things unless they're going to be quite small. But we need to do that. But the next step really is us feeling confident about the questions we're asking the full council, us meaning you as the steering committee, feeling confident about the question you want to pose to the full council to get specific names and ideas for additional people, non-council members, to fill in here. So
I guess I have a question, David.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Do you mean the question we're going to frame to our fellow council members to get other representative organizational expertise, or members of the public and community? Those feel like two different questions, and they're both important. Are we asking the council to think of ideas for both, or are we opening up more widely for public participation, subject to limitations in size?
I believe what I'm trying to say is that you need to pose to the full council a question saying, who would be good candidates from outside our ranks as a council to supplement who we have on here amongst ourselves, right? In the way that the reason that question is important is because you will lay out the criteria about what you think is needed. That's what I'm trying to say, perhaps not very clearly. And so a piece of work that we could do quickly now is saying, you know, do we have the criteria right? Do we want to say anything particular about these individual subcommittees, right? For instance, the cross-sector mitigation is a tricky one, right? Because it's going to need some sectoral expertise in transportation and buildings, right? And, you know, other things, which are the big components of that. You know, if there's other things we want to say, for instance, in just transitions, we've already had a little conversation saying, wow, we think it would be really important to have leadership in here that is BIPOC of color. You know, that kind of specificity may be helpful. Jared?
So if it's okay, I just want to go back 1 second to capture something. I agree that's where we need to go, and I'm happy to do that. I just want to capture one thought. And of course, this is going to be the prerogative of the administration in terms of the co-chair of the cross-sector mitigation committee. But since there was, I would just want to put in a recommendation that since there was so much good work done by the Vermont Climate Commission, which had been co-chaired by then Deputy Secretary, now Commissioner Peter Walk, and Riley Allen from the Public Service Department had also been incredibly involved. I know that Commissioner Tierney has said that, I believe she said on the last call, she was not interested in co-chairing a committee, and I know that it looks like you, Secretary Moore, are focused on the science and data side. The extent that they would be available and willing, given the depth of experience and knowledge on the cross-sector mitigation side, if that could be Commissioner Walk or Deputy Commissioner Allen or Ed McNamara from the department, that would be, I think that would help that group hit the ground running and be really effective.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Jared, for that, and that certainly aligns with thinking that Suzanne and I have done so far as well.
Great.
Right. Okay. So if we think about the big picture here of trying to get a bunch of ideas and names this week. You all as a steering committee will probably need to come back together at the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, to review those names and come up with a slate. And then that slate gets reviewed next Monday by the full council. So that's the flow of what we see happening. And this is our, quick hit conversation now to make sure we're posing the question correctly to all of your fellow council members. So we get those names and we get those ideas coming in over the next day or two. And then you're going to have to get back together at the end of the week to review and put it all together. Does it make sense? And apologies to take more of your time, but I think that's the only way we get to February 8th and have a good conversation February 8th. So how would you like to pose this question to your fellow council members? Like, well, how would you like them to be responding? Because you could ask them when they, for instance, propose a name, that they show how it lines up with the criteria you're putting out there. So is there anything you want to provide as guidance around that and criteria? I use the word expertise and balance, the phrase, which seems to make sense, but I'd welcome other thoughts about what we're really looking for here. Am I befuddling everybody with the way I'm posing that question?
Well, I can read back, David, maybe what I wrote down as the discussion was going, but it's just the first question would be sort of the who, right? Who would be good candidates from outside council to supplement our expertise? And then I have in parentheses balance, and I'm not sure exactly how to phrase that because I'm thinking it's both a geographic component. I know that there have been concerns raised about not having a significant representation from truly some of the most rural parts of Vermont, as well as the southwestern corner of the state, as well as that sectoral piece. And so probably, I would benefit from some additional words. And then essentially just a brief survey where once we have that high level question where we would ask people to provide the name, affiliation, contact information if available, and maybe a sentence or even just a few keywords that would reflect what attributes that individual might bring to the council. From my vantage, and recognizing this is a bit self-serving, would be also if in nominating somebody, people would do a little bit of initial outreach and at least ensure that the people have some modicum of interest, so that we're not talking about folks that will ultimately turn us down just due to a lack of capacity. But that would be my proposal. So name, affiliation, a little bit of words to expertise, and then some sort of context.
How's that sound?
Well, I guess you hit an important point there, Julie. I think representation, geographically, demographically, but also the question about time. What are we going to put out there as the time requirements? There will be meetings. We know there'll be a lot of probably technical materials to review ahead of time. The statute gives us a whole bunch that we have to review. We're going to have, I think, technical staffers available to each committee as appropriate. That will be feeding, in my mind, the subcommittee this information as well. So, it's more than just once a week. I think it's, and I guess what I would ask of the councils, what do you think? What do you see the commitment of these committees looking like? Those of you who've been down, this path before.
This isn't a fully formed thought. I would just offer that as I think about this, it almost is forming in my mind, and this could be totally off, but it's really two types of folks that we're looking for. On the one hand, it's folks whose kind of technical expertise, whose kind of professional experience and training will enable them to help us kind of move the work product forward. And then there's another group who would engage less on that kind of technical objective work product side and more on the kind of making sure a particular perspective is represented. I think of those as stakeholders. And, you know, I think that from my perspective, for the stakeholders who have a particular kind of interest or piece of knowledge that should be added to this to help set the context, there it's really important that we have some sectoral, geographic, demographic diversity and balance. And I think ideally that happens on the other side as well. I'm just, and I don't know how to frame that. I'm saying that in my head, there are kind of two different, and regardless of whether those categories are right or if they are, I do think that there's this additional criteria that would be valuable in terms of the way we work together, in terms of really promoting kind of a civil and collaborative approach. I think given the amount of time that we have to put together this climate action plan, we really need to be kind of focused on being productive and working collaboratively and well and efficiently together. And so I see these subcommittees as really kind of goal and work product focus rather than kind of a debate club where it's just kind of a, you know, well, you say this, but I say this. Like I think that in order to achieve that, it's yes about the facilitation, but it's also about the composition of folks who are willing to, you know, listen, who are willing to look at the evidence and the data and not just kind of push one kind of narrow agenda.
Yeah. And I think that absolutely reflects this idea of balance and the dilemma. And it came up last Monday, if you remember, with somebody saying, and I can't remember who it was, it might have been you, Chris, saying we don't need one of everybody, right, to achieve balance, because there will be circles of engagement, right, concentric circles of engagement. So we will be reaching lots of folks. So it's not like these subcommittees need one of everybody, but you have to have some sort of smell test of balance, whether it's geographic or type of actor. So it'll be tricky to like land on 10 people, right, including yourselves, or whatever your number is, you know, 8 to 12 people that match that and give you that. It is very likely that in your cross-sector group, you're going to be above 12. And in your science and data group, you're going to be below 8, for instance. That's okay too. But Jared, I think the way you're laying it out there sounds sensible. Do others want to react to that?
If it helps us think this through, I think another piece of this is making sure we have a very robust channel to receive input from stakeholders, the public, who are not on these committees. So like you were saying, you know, we're not going to be able to have perfect representation on each of the committees, but if we establish processes by which we really solicit that public input and get out the information, you know, that the committees are deliberating upon, that will help us ensure that we've got, you know, a lot of really good, valuable input into into our deliberations, what decisions we're making, that kind of thing. So I think that process is going to be key to making the committees work as well. So especially given the broad, I mean, the charge of this council is extraordinarily broad and deep, and the impacts are similar. So I think that might also help with mitigating fears that folk have about you know, the council being too cloistered or anything like that. If we just make so anyway, I'm just saying I think that process will be critical to to the subcommittees as well, especially since the subcommittees are where so much work is going to get done.
Yeah, and just Chris, to be clear, we are anticipating kind of a communications and outreach contractor to work with both the council, the subcommittees, the facilitator, and top of the list of things is to create sort of a more robust website and opportunity for that public comment box that a number of folks have suggested. Certainly appreciate the efforts that Melissa has gone to create a holding place for all of our documents thus far, but recognize we need something different to actually achieve our communication goals, in addition to just having this repository for the council's work at this point.
Can I recommend that as we kind of, after we leave this meeting and come up with a list of names, and hopefully, Julie, to your point, go and do a little bit of our own work and making sure that they understand the time commitment and how we would expect them to show up, that we flag David's point about those concentric rings, and especially those that we would want for targeted outreach. It might be very easy for us to think of names and think they don't have enough time and therefore not reach out to them, but it would be nice to have I don't know, a warehouse of names that we want to pull from, and using Susanna as an example. She doesn't have the time potentially to sit on a subcommittee, but we would hope that she would be one of the top people we would be targeting for outreach with the Just Transition subcommittee. So I don't know if we're creating like a larger spreadsheet of people that have the time and those that we need to have their input on, though.
Nice idea. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we're circling in around this, and we can pull some of Jared's language there in the description. We can maybe, Secretary Moore, when you do that survey, you can make mention of these things, right? Like what Lauren's saying, and the fact that there will be a robust website, and that this is part of, membership in a subcommittee is not the only way that people's voices are going to be incorporated into this, right? So it's not, the stakes seem appropriate. Okay, that all seems great. I also want to just double check the time expectation. We've been talking a little bit about it. We haven't put any numbers to it. Like when I put a number to it, I've said 4 to 8 hours a week when it's really cooking. Particularly in April, May, and June, because the subcommittee work is really going to cook in April, May, and June, so that by mid-year, the subcommittees are raising up draft ideas to the full council. So I think that's my expectation, is probably, I don't know if others have a different number, 4 to 6, 4 to 8 hours a week of your time.
That sounds right to me, and we could probably back it out by thinking about how frequently we think the meetings will be in that time period, and then add to it, because if the meetings become bi-weekly or weekly for a period of time, I think we easily get to that number you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to start off with bi-weekly meetings of the subcommittees, and then as you get close to the, getting draft recommendations ready, you may need to intensify that, particularly if there's a deadline imposed. Right? So,
David, if I may, just for clarification's sake, because I know that folks use the term biweekly sometimes to mean once every 2 weeks and sometimes to mean twice a week. Can you clarify what?
I mean, start out once every 2 weeks just to get going, and then intensify to once a week. Would be my suggested thing. Maybe they need to start out once a week anyway. Yeah.
My sense is that that initial time frame of 4 to 8 hours is a good starting point, and I would lean toward, given the amount of work and the timeline we're looking at, I would think that we're probably likely going to need to be meeting. It may vary by committee. As well, but I can see certainly some committees needing to start off weekly.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think it probably, to your comment, David, about schedule, will be most intense through the end of June, and then maybe could be dialed back a little bit, but I'm sort of envisioning the subcommittees will need to have kind of completed an initial draft of their work product by that time, so that there's an opportunity for the council to review and frankly for then Jane and her team to try to knit all of those pieces together into a singular document.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, it seems like we're getting the right instruction here, and then obviously all of you are answering this survey too, right? So this is an opportunity for all of you, and I think we should I would recommend a deadline of like Wednesday close of business or something. That may be a little tight, particularly if there's the Secretary Moore's wish of testing with these individuals. But something that allows you to probably get back together Thursday afternoon. We've already internally blocked off Thursday at 2 p.m. And would welcome if you all want to check your calendars real quick if that works. But internally, we've been holding that time, and so we'd want to have a slate. We want to have the survey done by Thursday morning.
Sorry, David, what was the time? Thursday at 2, you said?
Yeah, Thursday at 2 p.m.
Just this Thursday, that's the only block for that one. It's not a going forward, right?
Just an extraordinary. Yeah, it's not a steady.
Yeah, I can't do that. I have I have something I can't move.
Okay.
But
well, let's look, and we can.
I could do 3 p.m. or later that day, but 1 to 3 p.m. is blocked for a multi-person meeting that I'm not in charge of.
Let's see what we can do, and maybe we do some asynchronous stuff as well, Liz. Like maybe afterwards we circle back, like we meet at 2, and
That's
then
fine.
I can circle back with you at 3, and something like that.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, great.
This is neither here nor there, but just heads up, next Monday's meeting, I have to take my mom to a medical appointment, so I'm going to have to cut that short, or else just hover by phone with muted.
Okay.
while
Okay.
I'm driving.
That's great. Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, I think it's going to be the reality as meetings start to get busier and like faster. We're going to be juggling. Okay. All right. So I'm conscious of the time. And so I feel like as long as you feel comfortable, I think Secretary Moore can go forth and draft that survey just like she did the last time and sent that out. And so that's good. And let's say either Wednesday evening or Thursday 10 a.m. to close the thing up. You tell me a little bit, Secretary Moore and Jane, like what kind of turnaround time you need to make sense of it.
Yeah, I'll probably, if it's assuming folks are amenable, give till like 9 p.m. on Wednesday. So it gives folks some off hours time to be able to look at it as well. But that allows, I like to work, my best work time is very early in the morning, and that would allow me to get into it on Thursday morning.
Perfect. Okay. All right. That makes sense, everybody? Okay. Great. Okay, so that brings us quickly to talk about the Monday meeting. And the Monday meeting right now, at least the way I've thought about it in my mind, and we've talked a little bit about it last week, there's two objectives, right? One objective is really nailing down the process roadmap or charter, or whatever term you want to use for it, but basically nailing that down and people feeling comfortable with it. And saying, this is us, this is who we are as a council, we're going to work this way. The second objective is to confirm the slate for the subcommittees, so the subcommittees could be then immediately stood up. Right? So those were the two things that I've seen as essential business on the 8th, so that the council feels like it has a process document, and then the subcommittees can be, up and running before the end of the month.
Just to make sure I'm clear on this, when you say the slate for the subcommittees, David, you just mean the council member appointments, or do you mean the entire subcommittee, council members plus everyone that gets floated from or revealed from this process that we're doing this week?
I am hopeful for the latter. that you are able on Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. to take the results of this survey and say, yeah, looking good. Let's do this. It's going to take a little while, but make a slate. And then you make that proposal to your fellow council, climate council members, and then Monday, right? This is a velocity that is a little bit dizzying, but it's the kind of velocity that's probably needed to do it.
I think it's necessary. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
Yeah. Do other folks have a comment about that, or does that feel realistic to be able to do that and get to Monday, and then Monday you've got a proposal from you all as a steering committee, and we're able to close it up? Yeah.
I think it's a great goal. I'm not sure it's completely realistic, but I think it's a great goal that we'll all work for. And in terms of the charter, David, I just have a quick question, which we can go to once this subcommittee discussion's over.
Okay, great. And so those 2 agenda items for next Monday, anything else that folks would want to try to achieve next Monday?
I do think, David, just sort of making sure that we're explicit, if we're to have that conversation about the subcommittees, include some of the open meeting law considerations, just the way those groups are going to need to work, and have that be on the agenda.
Right.
So Julie, will you have Matt available?
I will.
Okay.
Might be a standing thing, so it's obvious, but also a preview of the February 22nd meeting agenda, or a discussion of what that would look like coming up.
Yeah, and if that's the case, we should say a word about that now or Thursday, right? You all. There's kind of like an obvious next step, which is sending off the subcommittees with whatever send off you as a council want to give them, right? So going through the subcommittee detailed kind of, this is what we hope you do kind of comment feels like the right conversation for February 22nd, so that the subcommittees have a full council kind of send off. That feels right, but I think let's maybe on Thursday, if we want to work that over a little bit about how we do that, because we have up to 4 hours on the 22nd, so we do have time to do things. All right, but I recognize we're almost out of time right now. So let's just summarize our next steps, and I see we're actually doing a little public comment. I'm grateful for Annette doing that. Before we go to public comment, just for our next steps, Thursday, 2 o'clock, we're going to look at the results from the survey that Secretary Moore is going to send out today-ish. We basically are on board with those 2 big agenda items for February 8th. Just as a heads up, there is a Microsoft Word document that's slightly more narrative than this PowerPoint that we've been looking at. And we're going to start to circulate that around soonish, because that may be actually like the document, like charter document, whereas this PowerPoint is a summary of it. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. And we'll see you on Thursday, and if Liz or anybody else can't do it, let's figure out a way to meet asynchronously to make sure your input's in there too. Okay.
David, did we nail down that Microsoft Teams is the only platform that we're going to be able to use?
I'd be interested in Secretary Young's point. I will be an extremely vocal and hopefully helpful advocate for shifting away to another platform, Zoom, and helping to share the experience in Maine and other states that have had concerns about Zoom but overcame those concerns and are extremely happy they did. But I recognize each state has their own rhythm and technology office, and so Secretary Young, I welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm certainly I'm happy to speak with the Secretary of the Agency of Digital Services. And, you know, as we all know, there were, and I don't know if there are existing concerns with the security around Zooms from the state's perspective, and whether, you know, he still has those concerns. But we have been relatively deferential to his desires in this regard because of the broader implications for cybersecurity and the like. So I am not qualified to speak to that, but I will speak to the one who is.
Right, right. And I'm happy to be a resource if that's helpful in linking up with other state offices and trying to make those same decisions.
Yeah, Secretary, I guess that's the only thing I would recommend is just is for David or someone who, it sounds like he's already articulated what the concerns and issues are. If somebody else could just be if you would be open to have somebody articulate those concerns to the IT experts, then maybe some of the concerns could be resolved. Not trying to overturn state policy, I totally get it, but just yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Hey, it's Liz, and I know we're at our time, but I see Annette Smith's comments on the chat, and she indicates she does have audio. It feels important that if we're publicly warned, publicly meeting, that we take that time. And I also think there's a way, I hope we intend to address the concern she's raising in the comment, knowing that we're gathering names for subcommittees, but as I mentioned earlier, having some ability or process to also reach out more broadly to the public, not just through attending meetings, but also within the limits of, you know, numbers of subcommittees that work, having some public participation additionally facilitated. So at any rate, if we have a minute, I'm certainly willing to make sure we finish that piece of the meeting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think if everybody's okay, let's take a moment of public comment and finish up. And I know some people might need to drop if they have other obligations, but let me just open this up. And I know, Annette, you've been offering some comment. Annette, do you want to open up your mic and comment?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that you're interested in hearing what I have to say. I've been monitoring all the meetings and have been in touch with a lot of people, and also sort of been hearing what people have been saying from a variety of perspectives and groups. And there is a lot of interest in these subcommittees, and there's been sort of the idea out there that people who aren't a member of the council can serve on the subcommittees. And so I've been listening today to try and understand how that was going to happen. And I will say I'm a little surprised to hear that there isn't a plan that I heard to open it up for people to apply. I'm not saying that I want to be on one or don't want to be on one, but if it's going to be done by people doing outreach, while I do have a specific set of expertise, honestly, I can't imagine that I'm going to be on anyone's list. So if I was interested and I did feel I had something to offer, I wouldn't have any way to express what I had, since I'm not necessarily in what I would consider to be the friends and family club of this particular group. And so, I mean, for instance, I've tried to join Energy Action Network several times and been told no. So I just want to raise that and let you know that there is a lot of interest in these subcommittees, and there is so much talent in Vermont. And you know, I'll name one person who I know applied, or his name was submitted, Ed Cameron from Manchester. Maybe he will be on someone's list, but if he isn't and he wants to be on, I hope you will have a way for someone of his expertise to be able to be considered. So thank you very much for hearing what I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So go ahead, Jerry. Yeah.
Dave, if I can just quickly, just a direct response. I would just say, Annette, that is news to me. I've served as executive director of EAN for 4 years, and I've never seen or heard of an interest in joining the network. But I appreciate your comment. I would say that I think one thing that we could do is reach out to those folks from the House and Senate who collected nominations from across the state for the council to see if they have those lists handy, so we could review those those names as a possible starting point to think about subcommittee members.
Thanks. Are there anything else? And before we finish up, are there other folks on the line who want to make a public comment right now? Members of the public or other people observing our work right now that want to make a comment? Okay, great. Secretary Young, go ahead, please.
Thank you, David. I guess before we close, you've outlined next steps, and I appreciate the public comment. And again, I think it kind of goes to, it could be a goal to have this all done by Thursday, but I think it's going to realistically take a little longer to make sure that, we're honoring the interest of others who may be interested in being on the subcommittees. And again, it begs the question, and maybe we'll think about it over the next couple of days, as to really what are we asking for from these subcommittees, and whether they're going to be more technical, drafting proposals, putting them out to a very robust public comment structure through a very rigorous public comment structure, or to Jared's point, having everyone at the table, and what's achievable, and what's the most meaningful way to do this, and capture Annette's concerns as well. So I appreciate the conversation today. I think it's been great, and I look forward to Thursday after we've all had some time to think about the great ideas and concerns we've heard.
Great, thanks. And we do need to finish up. Lauren, I see your hands up. You want to just chime in quickly?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to Secretary Young's point, if we form as best we can committees by Thursday to be represented or presented to the full council on Monday, I'd like to note that perhaps we only come up with 8-ish names each, or maybe we can only find 5. And if the subcommittee meets, it's kind of like a fluid process, and maybe even the subcommittee identifies expertise or subject matter areas that aren't represented well and can bring them in, so that after a few meetings, we get the full subcommittee complexion that we would need. Okay.
And that could be something the council says, yes, go forward that way, right? You want your full council to give you the authority to do that, Okay, great. All right, everybody. Thanks for running a little bit over. We covered a lot of ground. We'll see you on Thursday. Expect a survey from Secretary Moore to go out, and thanks. And we're off to the races. Wonderful.
Great. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Monday. Enjoy the snow.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.